Hey, what's up, y'all? You are listening to your Mental Matters podcast. I'm your girl, Mo. And for those of you watching, thank you for tuning in. We're back with another episode and with a very special guest. Uh, her name is Kimberly.
Hello.
Yes, and I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a few seconds. But yeah, I just want to thank you for coming and, being a part of this episode. Us kind of doing this collaboration and mashup, I think is great. I'm just excited. I'm excited
Mhm.
for you to be here, for us to share space together and talk about what we're going to talk about today,
Mhm.
um, which is healing, or that is the topic that we're discussing today. And I think I was just telling Kim before we started that I don't think that I've actually like had an episode where we like thoroughly talked about healing, right? And so I
Mhm.
think like with you kind of like just um, bringing this topic to the forefront. I think, um, it was just great. Like I was like, it was a no brainer. Like, yeah, let's talk about it.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I appreciate you for coming. And yeah, Kim, introduce yourself to the people. Who are you? What do
Mhm.
you do? Yeah.
Well, first off, I want to say thank you for like creating this space
Mhm.
and, allowing me to have this conversation with you because I personally feel like it's an intense conversation and
Yes.
it's one that people don't really like to talk about because it could go so many ways, right?
Hmm.
But also just thank you for, like I said, creating this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me get into myself
Yeah.
because I'm excited because
Of
I've never
course.
really been able to have this conversation before, so I'm just like really looking forward to where it's gonna go.
Hmm.
But me as a person, I'm Kimberly. I also go by the name of Chimera, and I have a brand by the name of Palm Eye. And essentially, with all these different roles that I've named, I like to present myself as a qualified mental health professional. Like when I'm not promoting meditation and affirmations and just overall like spiritual self care, I'm also a case manager. I've done behavioral therapy, or rather, I was a registered behavioral therapist because, technically speaking, within the mental health field, you can't label yourself as certain things.
Hmm.
You could more so say, like, the technical aspect of it just for, like, I guess, logistics
Yeah.
or legal purposes.
Hmm.
And then also, you don't want to like advertise yourself as someone that does this. You always need like credentials, which is
Hmm.
understandable because you don't want anyone to just give you, advice, especially when it comes to mental health.
Of
Because
course.
a lot of times you have to understand what you're talking about and you can't just like, preach it.
Hmm.
And then, my last role with Palm Eye is I've it's a weird like thing to conceptualize because like I said, Palm Eye is a spiritual brand. It's more so about like spiritual self-care in terms of, understanding your chakras, understanding your aura, the energy that you project into the world, manifesting, things of that nature.
Right.
So it's like because there's no specific name
Hmm.
within what I like to call the matrix, the
Yeah.
3D plane that we operate in, everyday life,
Hmm.
it's hard to conceptualize, but I like to label it as being a spiritual peer support. And I
Hmm.
say that because, within the mental health field, we have peer support specialists.
Right.
So, for example, if you're recovering from addiction,
Hmm.
a lot of the times the programs would offer a peer support specialist who, might encourage you to connect with your spiritual side,
Hmm.
connect with yourself on a deeper level, build that self awareness, build that emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So, in terms of spirituality, I've come to the realization, having seen people do that type of work,
Yeah.
I've come to the realization that spirituality is similar to that because I'm, doing the work of having people, or rather helping people understand what is a chakra,
Hmm.
breaking that down into everyday terminology.
You're right.
Like earlier I was saying to our producer, right?
Mhm. Engineer.
Okay, or engineer. I
Mhm.
don't know. Sometimes I get confused with the word because it's like you're producing something. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, engineer. I was
Mhm.
saying to him, like, colors can translate into energy.
Mhm.
Energy is essentially, emotions, or rather, emotions are energy because they're energy in motion. Having those type of conversations, like
Yeah.
we could talk about it all day.
Mhm.
But that's basically the work of what I've labeled being a peer support, I mean rather spiritual peer support specialist, I guess.
Mhm.
I'm working on a name, but at
Yes.
least I'm able to label it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much my little blurb.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, I guess when did this journey start for you? Cuz I think like
Hmm.
just what you described I think is is amazing. I think that's great work. It's great work that you're doing. And I think the mental health field is very broad, but I
Yeah.
do think like, you know, where you start and like what kind of like puts you on that track, I think is always like a cool story to hear because everybody's is different. But what was it for you? Like, how did you get your start in this
Hmm.
realm?
I love talking about this
Mm-hmm.
because Um, it was during a time where, life was supposed to be, or rather what I considered supposed to be, great.
Mm-hmm.
I had just started college. So that meant for me being independent, even though like I went to Brooklyn College.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to go out of state. Like I could have went to Bridgeport,
Yeah.
but my Caribbean parents, they were like, no, you have to stay here. And I was like, man, like I had a whole scholarship and everything.
Oh my
Like, yeah, but
gosh.
at the end of the day, I understand them now, especially being like a mom myself. So I,
Right.
I get, why they were like, no, stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Cause Bridgeport was look kind of wonky, but we're not gonna get into that. I mean, I was okay with it because I was gonna be far, but
Yes. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so it was a matter of finding my autonomy
Yeah.
and at the same time still, being a child in my mother's home.
Right.
And that's, kind of difficult
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with a mother who is so used to having her kids around her.
Right.
That's the best way that I can, conceptualize it now as an adult,
Yeah.
and, understanding it more. Um, and so it was just really tough because I wanted to show up a certain way in the world, and I felt like I was like so restricted, not just by my mom, and her expectations of me, or what I thought she expected of me,
Mm-hmm.
but more so, what am I gonna do with my college career?
Mm-hmm.
Where am I gonna go after this? What do I want to do creatively wise? Because
Mm-hmm.
at the time I was also doing like poetry, just for my self expression. I always like
Yes.
love verbal or rather written communication.
Yeah.
Um, but during that time, it was really dark, having so many different thoughts, so many like what I felt like were pulls in
Mm-hmm.
so many different directions. And it just led to me what I felt like having an existential crisis, the
Mm.
best way to conceptualize it. And during that time, Solange had just came out with her her album. Can't remember it, but Crane.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, why can't I remember the album?
Mm-hmm.
But it's okay. But she came out with like Crane, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or Don't Touch My Hair. Like
Yes.
those were like songs that I really felt like spoke to me,
Yeah.
and they mainly spoke about existence. What
Yeah.
does it mean to exist? What does it mean to be content?
Right.
And so that translated into my life, and I guess my solution for that during that time was affirmations.
Yeah.
Like that was like the start of my spiritual journey, I would
Yeah.
say. It wasn't really meditation because I used to be an overthinker,
Mm-hmm.
and I say used to be because that's not a story that I tell myself anymore. So I used to overthink a lot, and I just felt like it was very difficult to, meditate.
Yeah.
Meditation, the way that I was introduced to it, is essentially, sitting with nothing.
Right.
You're not supposed to think about anything. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of difficult when your mind is made to think. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while to really like find a way to meditate. But
Mm-hmm.
affirmations was my initial meditation.
Got
And I
it.
say that because, I would sit with that every day. Affirmations being like, I am amazing, I am confident, things that sentences that I would tell myself to
Mm.
build my self-esteem, build my self-worth, my love for myself,
Yeah.
instead of, what I was used to before, having felt like I was being pulled in so many different directions.
Right.
Oftentimes the affirmations that I were telling myself were negative.
Mm.
Like, they were like, "Oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not doing enough of this." Just like
Right.
constant self-criticism, because I just felt like I wasn't meeting the expectations of the different societal roles that, I had to operate in at the time.
Mhm.
And, affirmations ultimately helped me because it helped me understand that in order to tackle my reality
Mhm.
and take control, because like I said, being pulled in so many different directions, I felt like I was out of control.
Yeah.
So in order to take back my control, I had to tackle what was in my subconscious mind, what
Mhm.
was going on a deeper level that made me feel about my reality this way.
Right.
Because consciously I felt like I was good. Life is great.
Mhm.
I'm about to be 19. I'm in college. I'm getting to ride the subway by myself. My
Mhm.
mom not saying nothing. I'm working. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, I felt like I had at least some autonomy that I could have been grateful for, but it was hard to be grateful for that
Mhm.
when I had, how do I say it? I wasn't able to see it when I
Mm.
was criticizing myself.
Mhm.
So affirmations, I also got into the Four Agreements.
Mm.
That was a really great, I guess, self help, but like I felt like it was more so a spiritual book.
Mhm.
Because it was written by an indigenous person,
Okay.
Pablo Cow. I can't remember his name exactly.
Yeah.
But essentially it was a short book, and I
Mhm.
appreciated that too, because again, I was like such an overthinker during that time. I was in college too, working part-time, like 2 part-time jobs. I felt like I didn't really have time to be reading books like that.
Yeah.
So, besides the ones that I had to.
Mhm.
So, I really appreciated that it was short and concise, and it really like spoke to my spirit.
Yeah.
Like one of the 4 agreements that, helped me tackle my subconscious mind and understand, how that plays out in reality is don't take things personal.
Mm.
And oftentimes that's difficult when you feel like a victim in the world, when you
Mm.
feel like the universe is constantly against you.
Right.
Um, and, the reason why he said don't take things personal is because, from his point of view, right, the way that he explained it and the way that I received it, you have to understand that people are going through life the same way that you are going through life. And how you're seeing things, they're seeing things a different way.
Mhm.
And ultimately, what's affecting them affects how they treat you.
Mm.
Now, it's not an excuse.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of getting you to, take accountability for how you respond to this person.
Got it.
That's how I received it.
Mhm.
And at the time, I felt like my mom, at the time, it was really like, familial conflict that was really, creating that negative energy for me during that time.
Mhm.
So I felt like my mom was just constantly upset at me that I wasn't, meeting her expectations. And we were like arguing a lot because during that time I was like, yo, I'm 19. I feel like I can tell you how I feel without you feeling like I'm being disrespectful or without you dismissing me.
Right.
But, again, because she's so used to our dynamic, that mother child dynamic, it's going to be hard for her to receive it as, me advocating for myself.
Right.
So that being said, in moments like that, according to that first for agreement,
Mhm.
essentially I'm understanding that, she just had a bad day. She's a
Right.
teacher, right? She
Mhm.
teaches in Brooklyn.
Mhm.
And sometimes she'll have like really intense days. And I'm, me being me, I'll be like, hey, mommy, let me show you this, da, 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 something like that.
Yeah.
And she might say like, "Oh no, hold on a second, leave me alone." She might respond, initially being annoyed and not recognize that, oh, that
Right.
kind of bothered me.
Right.
Um, and it's understandable because sometimes when you're really annoyed, and not to say it's an excuse, but just like sometimes human behavior is to just respond.
Yeah.
Sometimes we, especially if it's like a really intense emotions, we're not going to really recognize it right away. We
Mhm.
might recognize it afterwards,
Yeah.
depending on, the level of emotional intelligence, or rather the level of self awareness, right?
Correct.
So, that being said, it kind of helped me not get upset. Um, and it just helped me, how do I say it? I forgot. I
No,
forgot.
I'm following you.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like it also allows you to like tap into that emotional intelligence that you were speaking about,
Mhm.
and like almost like you have empathy, right? You have like
Mm,
being able
yeah,
to
yeah,
be
yeah.
empathetic to what the other person may be experiencing can also help, I think, with that. Like not to like I guess that's kind of the way I'm interpreting what you're saying
Mhm.
as like empathy. Because I think for me, like in the moments where um I'm not tapped into like empathy is when I can be more reactive as opposed to like being able to assess like, okay, this person, something's going on with them.
Mhm.
As an empathetic person, I'm able to put myself in maybe their position. Like see
Yeah.
myself like if I was a teacher, right?
Mhm.
And I just came from dealing with 25 to 30 students or whatever, and then come home and I just need a moment, then that's understandable. So I guess, with that too, I think um yeah, I think empathy comes into play with that too, emotional
Yeah.
intelligence, like you were saying. And I think it sounds like that truth was able to kind of allow you to tap into that.
Mhm.
And I think that's profound though. And I've heard a lot of good things about the four agreements. I haven't
Yeah.
actually been able to sit down myself and like read it and like take the
Mhm.
time, but I think a lot of the things align just with mental health and like, self-care, self-love, like being able to care for others.
Mhm.
Um and that sounds really good. And I'm actually like I want to read it now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think it's good like just dealing with people,
Mhm.
especially like I think with dealing with people because I feel like I always am like as a therapist, that is what I do. It doesn't mean that I don't have my moments in my interactions with friends and family
Yeah.
where I'm just like, what's wrong with you? And it's like,
Mhm.
no, like I think maybe I have more practice with being able to be empathetic and being able to take a back seat, but I think I'm still human. So sometimes I do mess up and I
Mhm.
realize like I'm not being as understanding right now. And I think those agreements can kind of keep you aligned is
Yeah.
what it sounds like. So I think that's dope.
Yeah.
I think that's dope. And I love that. And I know like, just in the conversation about healing, because that's what we're talking about essentially,
Mhm.
healing. And this was a topic that you kind of introduced and wanted us to discuss. What made you want to choose this topic, and like what when you thought of the topic, like what were
Yeah.
you thinking about specifically?
Mm. What was I thinking about? I was thinking about so many things.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about, I felt like there was an overall need of this conversation
Yeah.
because, a lot of us were inside for a lot of years, like about 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
almost 3 years when you think about it. Some of us graduated, like I graduated in 2020, so I graduated inside, you know what I
Right.
mean? So because of that, I felt like, just from what I'm observing and then, in my everyday work, whether it be kids or adults or even elders,
Yeah.
a lot of people are having a hard time adjusting to, the way that we're trying to normalize everyday life now.
For
You
sure.
know what I mean? After having a completely different definition of what normal was
Mm-hmm.
for a good, what, like 2, 3 years
Yeah.
practically. Now, you have kids who have a hard time really communicating,
Yeah.
or you have kids who have a hard time connecting to one another.
Yeah.
And that's really what I was thinking about, because my field of work, I like specializing in youth.
Yeah.
Like I like working with adults too in the mental health field,
Mm-hmm.
but my specialization is youth
Okay.
because I feel like there's not as much service for kids
Correct.
compared to adult services.
Hmm.
Or rather, the rhetoric around mental health services for kids is not the same. Like, it's not as open. I
Yeah.
feel like it's a little bit rigid because
Hmm.
of, kids not necessarily having a say
Yeah.
in, how they're taken care of when you think about it.
Hmm.
Just from my perspective.
Hmm.
But I feel like it was a good conversation to have because there's so many ways that you can define healing. And I feel like, some people might be wondering, what is healing?
Hmm.
Especially nowadays. Like, I feel like it's also becoming a trend.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm on my healing journey, my soft girl era. What does that
Hmm.
mean?
That part. Okay.
So,
Let's get
yeah,
into it.
I want to definitely get into that.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I
Hmm.
think that, and just what you were saying about children too, I think I don't specialize with children, and I think I'm intentional with that, because I think it takes a certain level of just like patience and like
Hmm.
really, and I feel like I'm patient with the kids that are in my life. Like I have god kids, godchildren. My friends have children, and I treat them like they're my own, like they're my blood. And I
Hmm.
think but I think when it comes to children in the field, it can be very like just touchy, I feel like. And so I think that it takes a certain level of
Hmm.
patience and dedication to like helping children that you may not necessarily need with adults. And this is just opinion based, right? This is not like fact.
Yeah.
But this is how I feel about it personally. And so I do like tip my hat off to anybody who has dedicated their work, especially in the mental health field, to children, because I think it takes another level of patience. Because with adults, like you're already grown, right? So
Hmm.
it's like you're coming for services because you want to heal, you want to work through something, versus children. Sometimes it takes more prying and
Hmm. Yeah.
probing and really trying to understand what's going on in the mind of the child. Um, and it just takes more um, groundwork before you actually get in there.
Hmm.
And so I think I definitely tip my hat off to anybody working with kids, and they chose that, as opposed to like, because their ACS is like
Hmm.
huge, but
Yeah.
there's just there's so many things around, like, you know child services for mental health, which can be like, that's a whole other conversation. But as far as healing goes, and just the topic of healing, and like what is it, right? And instead of it just being like a punchline or like trendy, right? Or what's
Yeah.
what's new to say, like what is it at its core? And I think I was actually like looking up the actual definition in like Webster or Merriam. I think I have one here. Um and it says, I'll just read it, so the audience can know the true definition. And this is according to Merriam-Webster. So it says, what is the true meaning of healing? Healing is to make well again, to restore to health, to heal the sick, to cause an undesirable condition to be overcome, right? To mend, right? And so, and then there's another definition on Google that says the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again,
Mhm.
right? Tending to heal, therapeutic, right? So I think like, yeah, I think I love all of these definitions. I think they all mean the same thing essentially, which is, I think I love the to make healthy again, to mend, to overcome something, to overcome an undesirable condition. I think at its core, that's what healing is. And a lot of people um say that they're on a journey of healing, but they aren't actually doing the work to heal. And so
Mhm.
I think it's easier said than done, right? And I think that could be part of the reason why a lot of people maybe don't always get to the place of healing that they want to get to, because it is a
Mhm.
lot of work. But for you, and I can share too, like, um, has there ever been something that you had to heal from, um, or currently healing from, that was difficult for you, or that you had a hard time overcoming, um but you eventually got there? Or like,
Mhm.
what is your relationship with healing?
Me and healing have a love and hate relationship. Let me tell you, like,
Girls, talk that talk,
it
okay.
has slapped me across my head a few times, and I've, attacked back as well
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
my own little way.
Yeah.
But really and truly, Healing for me has helped me understand my relationship with others.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it's a love hate relationship, because there are times where I might want to keep a relationship going,
Mhm.
but my healing journey is basically telling me, no, you need to let this go.
Right.
And no matter how many times I push, I push, I push,
Mhm.
it just doesn't work out, because
Yeah.
ultimately that's not a part of my journey.
Right.
And it's not something that's healing, it's something that's preventing me from healing.
Mhm.
So essentially, that's what I'm still healing from, my relationship with people pleasing, I
Mm.
would say.
Mhm.
Because that has to do with lack of boundaries. It has to do with over pleasing, in the sense of not loving myself enough
Yeah.
to say no, especially when it's something that I feel like, is basically indicating that I'm being taken advantage of.
Mm.
Because I want to keep up the connection. I want to keep this person, keep in this person's favor.
Yeah.
Um, and that translates from like childhood trauma, for
Mm.
example, of being raised in not to. It's not. Sometimes when I have this conversation, people feel like I'm being too harsh on Caribbean culture,
Mm.
but really and truly, Caribbean culture is sometimes our parents don't really have that emotional affection that some of
Mhm.
us may need.
Let's talk
Some
about it.
Caribbean kids, may not need that, I love you and the hugs every day because they're good with the toys.
Yeah.
And it's a this goes into love languages.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
it's a matter of understanding your child's love language.
Exactly.
So my mom, she's an amazing woman.
Yeah.
She's empathetic. I love my mother, and she's one of the most caring person I know.
Yeah.
However, at the same time, she deals with a lot, so it's hard for her to empathize with her kids,
Yeah.
who she's the only one providing,
Got you.
for.
Mhm.
Like, she's the sole provider.
Yeah.
She's the mother and the father.
Yep.
So she has to take on those two roles. It's hard for her to sometimes, you know, operate in her divine feminine in
Right.
terms of being empathetic,
Yeah.
in terms of being understanding, compassionate sometimes. The emotional aspect of
Yeah.
human interaction.
Mhm.
Cuz she always has to operate as, her divine masculine, in the
Yeah.
sense of being the provider, being the one that has to do the reasoning, the ultimate judgment making,
Yeah.
basically. So, that being said, that often lead to me finding ways to get her to be affectionate, you
Mhm.
know? And I didn't realize that essentially I was learning how to people please,
Mm.
seeking validation.
Right.
And also, the reason why I say sometimes parents in our Caribbean culture don't necessarily understand their kid's love language is because they might teach the kid, speak, listen first, talk later.
Yeah.
You don't really ask too many questions.
Right.
And working in the mental health field, I've ultimately learned that when you teach a child that, you're basically teaching them, not to have boundaries and not to communicate.
Right.
You're teaching them not to have boundaries in the sense that ultimately, if they need to advocate for themselves, they cannot advocate for themselves
Mhm.
because they have to listen to what the other person is saying,
Yeah.
especially if that person's, in a place of authority.
Right.
And I also say you're teaching them not to communicate because you're just dismissing their feelings.
Right.
You're not allowing them to say what they want to say. So
Mhm.
a lot of times, human behavior, some people may internalize it
Yeah.
and take it out on themselves. And that looks like self criticism, validation seeking, because their love isn't coming from inside, it's coming from outside, because
Mhm.
that's what they're taught. And then
Right.
on the other hand, you might have projection in the
Mhm.
sense of, they may be more aggressive towards people. They may not be emotionally available. They may not want to talk about feelings
Mhm.
because whenever they talk about feelings before, they was always dismissed.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm healing from.
Mhm.
Not whether it be internalizing or whether it be projection. I've just come to the understanding that, like we were talking about earlier, it's a matter of what I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
what is my definition of self-love?
Mhm.
What is my definition of self-worth?
Right.
So that I'm not letting someone dismiss my feelings. Because ultimately, everyone, our perspectives in some way might be correct,
Yep.
even though some could be harmful. It doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean it's right,
Yeah.
but it's a matter, when I say it's every perspective is correct, I'm trying to say that it's helpful to understand other perspectives so you can see how to interact with this person and understand why they're interacting with you and
Mhm.
act accordingly. That's
Mhm.
like the big thing about it. Not to like excuse their behavior like, "Oh, I understand you." No, I understand you. I understand that this is the person that you are,
Yeah.
and I'm going to act accordingly and remove myself or
Absolutely.
take whatever necessary actions that I feel, guarantees my peace and my safety and the safety of another person.
Mhm.
Because sometimes, like I said, certain perspectives can be very dangerous and
Yeah.
detrimental to other people and themselves.
Mhm.
But going back to, in terms of the definition of perspectives and how it relates to like self care, I bring that up because it helps me not take things personal. It
Yeah.
helps me not let people take control of my emotions.
Right.
Like I I get angry. Yeah, like
Mhm.
we all get angry, but it's a matter of how you respond to that anger.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's a matter of not allowing your anger to make someone else feel bad.
Yes.
But at the same time, finding a way to communicate your needs. It's not about dismissing your feelings,
Mhm.
by understanding the person. It's about like understanding how this person reacts and
Mhm.
how you can communicate your needs in a way for them to understand. Kind of
Exactly.
like meeting them at their level.
Yeah.
And it's kind of difficult when someone's hurting you. So that's why a lot of the times you have to let go of that relationship
Mhm.
because you can't keep hurting yourself again and again trying to advocate, to someone that doesn't want to hear you.
Correct.
Might as well let it go.
Correct.
And I feel like that's like a good definition of what healing has been for me and what,
Mhm.
I've been healing from.
I love that. And I appreciate you so much for sharing that too. I
Yeah.
think as you were talking, I definitely feel like I can just resonate with some of the things that you shared. I'm also Caribbean, and I was
Hmm.
gonna ask where in the Caribbean are you and
I'm
your family from?
Jamaican.
Girl, me too.
Yeah.
I'm half Jamaican, half Haitian, but
Hmm.
uh, I come from a single parent household. So my mom, I
Yeah.
was raised mainly with my Jamaican side. My mom being from Jamaica and my dad from Haiti. And my mom was super loving, right? I think that's one thing I can say. Like as far as I feel like the security and the love and everything that I needed, I got from my mom, despite my father not being there. But I do think, like, just in talking about healing, in the vein of healing, I think I feel like what I'm actively healing from, or just
Hmm.
making sure that I consciously think about on a regular basis, is like healing from, like, I guess the absence of a father, because I think like
Hmm.
that's a very, and the thing is, I don't think that I have like daddy issues or anything. I've never identified with that term,
Hmm.
because I feel like I got the love and security and what I needed from my mom. But I do think to like negate or ignore that aspect is not healthy, and that's not real life. That's not reality. So I think um being able to like identify and say, yeah, like this parent was absent, and so how has that affected me
Hmm.
in my adult life, has been, it's I feel like an ongoing healing process, because I do realize that I think a lot of the ways in which, because I feel like I operate in my masculine a lot, and I think that's because of his absence, right? Where it's like, yeah, like you gotta be strong, you gotta be firm. Like
Yeah.
in a room full of men, if I'm the only woman there, I feel right on in, right? Like, and I think that's because I operate from my masculine a lot, like
Hmm.
because I have to be strong, especially just being like about my business and things of that nature. Like I think that's been a lot of just how I've developed. And I
Hmm.
think now what I try to do is say, like, you don't have to, right? Like you don't have to always, that doesn't have to be your default, right? Like that, I think what we were talking about before the episode started, or I might have been talking about it with the engineer, is like finding that sweet spot, right? That like the balance of like, I think we were talking about that was when we were talking about work and
Work and
play,
play.
but finding that balance of like masculine and feminine, right? And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times I do operate from my feminine sometimes, but I think it's not equal. Like
Yeah.
I think, and it's not equal because there is a part of me that was wounded. Like my childhood self was wounded because my one of my parents were absent and I didn't know why. Right. And so I think
Mhm.
like being able to like just come to terms with it and like, I feel like I feel fine with it now. Like before growing up and stuff. Like I used to be more emotional and talking about it, but I do think being able to say like that's what it is, but like I'm fine and I'm okay and like his absence doesn't um mean that there's anything wrong with me. Like it doesn't even have anything to do with me. Like I think
Mhm.
I was able to come to terms with that years ago, right? Like whatever the choices is that he has made don't have anything to do with me, and kind of separate the two helped. So like I think for me in that vein, it's been a healing journey because it's like okay, you heal in one area and then you have to work on healing in this other area, which is like tapping into my feminine more and realizing like I
Yeah.
don't have to be
Soft girl era.
right. I don't soft girl era. I don't have to be one of the bros. I don't have
Mhm.
to be like I don't
Yeah.
have to be like dominant and like like even though I feel like that's not something that I could actually like turn off. I think
Oh my
I think it'll
god,
always
yo.
be
I resonate with that.
yeah, but just being more like I can be relaxed. I don't always have to take the lead. I can let a man take the lead and I can be, I can just operate from a place of like soft girl. I can tap into the soft girl era and I can
Mhm.
operate from a place of like still being about my business, but not having to, like, operate from this masculine. And so I think right now what I find myself doing is like catching myself when I feel like I'm getting too like maybe bigging up my chest. Like I'm like, girl, you need to calm down. You don't even need to do that. And I think
Yeah.
the more that you kind of like talk to yourself and teach yourself like you don't have to do that, it'll become second nature and then eventually you won't do it no more. And so I feel
Mhm.
like I'm on that journey of like constantly talking to myself and like affirming myself too and saying like you're good. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to overcompensate or you know operate from that place, because a lot of times I think when we operate from certain places as adults it comes from like a childhood wound, right?
Mhm.
That maybe we like don't realize. And so I think like now I do that often where I'm like, why am I responding in this way and where is it coming from? And I think like it's been super like eye opening and like healing for me to be able to like acknowledge that aspect of who I am, and
Yeah.
say like, you know, you are who you are now,
Mhm.
and like what happened before is what happened before. It was a part of your journey, but it's not, like it doesn't have to define who you are and how you operate now. So I think for me, like when I think about healing and like what that means for me, just in like in life, I think that is one area. But then there's other things, healing from relationships, from
Yeah.
exes, from from all types of things. But that's a whole thing, other thing in and of itself. But like that's been one of the major things I think is just operating from a healthy place, um and not allowing like child wounds to like be operating for me.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Mhm. That is so important. I had to sit
Yes,
with that
girl.
because that was a common theme
Hmm.
for me, like loved ones, or even like whenever I would do tarot readings, that would come up a lot.
Yeah.
In terms of taking responsibility, or rather taking accountability of our childhood wounds,
Yeah.
not letting it be our story.
Hmm.
Because understandably, like we've been through some stuff as kids,
Hmm.
no matter the severity of it,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's affected us in a way that, is affecting how we heal, how we love ourselves, how we take care of ourselves, and how we take care of other people.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of understanding that that's not necessarily who we are now.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be. It's a part of our story. Yeah, it's a part of our struggle. It's a part of, our healing.
Yeah.
It's definitely an aspect of us because it's still our energy.
Mm.
However, energy doesn't die, yes, but
Hmm.
energy can be transmuted. It
Yes.
can be changed, and a
Hmm.
part of changing the energy around situations is understanding that we're the only ones that can change it.
Mhm.
You know, if we give our power to someone else, then that other person is changing it. But
Mhm.
again, you know, see, one of the laws of the universe that I like to bring up all the time because it has ultimately helped me in my healing journey
Mhm.
is understanding that everyone has free will
Yeah.
and no one can take that away from you. It can
Mhm.
be manipulated, yes, because
Mhm.
in order to manipulate someone's free will, we have to get them to willingly do what we want them to do. You
Yes.
know? So at the end of the day, it's always up to us how we respond to a situation. It's
Yeah.
always up to us who has, you know, power over our emotions, over, you know, how we talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
And once we recognize that, man, I just felt chills a while ago. Like once you recognize that you're ultimately in power of your energy
Mhm.
and you know how you give it away and who you give it away to,
Mm.
the limit is it's limitless.
Right.
You know, the possibilities are limitless,
Endless.
right?
Yeah.
Endless.
Mhm.
Where did I get limitless from? I think I was thinking of the movie. I was definitely thinking of that movie
Yeah.
with Bradley Cooper.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why.
That's okay. Limitless is cool too. I
Yeah,
knew
we
what you
should.
meant.
I think I have to watch that. That's what my brain's telling me.
Yes. That might be the title of this episode.
Limitless. Yes.
Limitless. Yes. I love that. Period.
Definitely. I think
Mhm.
it should be. That'd be
Mhm.
dope.
Yes. All right, I'm gonna jot that down. Mhm. No, but
Mhm.
absolutely. I think I love that. I love that. And I think something that we have here too, that you kind of put in our notes for today was wounds showing up as triggers,
Yes.
right? And I think that's
Yeah.
so, because triggers is another word, another like trendy word that we always hear and see. Like, I'm triggered right now. You're
Yeah.
triggering me. Trigger. And it's like, what does that mean really? Right. And I think wounds show up as triggers, right? Like, when I do believe, like, when you're triggered by something, it is a it is telling that there's something that you need to work on, or maybe there's something that you haven't healed yet.
Mhm.
And yeah, can you think of a time when you were triggered, maybe recently, maybe in the past month or so,
Mhm.
um when you were triggered, and like, how did you handle it? How did you deal with it?
Mm. You know, one thing that's coming up
Hmm.
is I've recently started dating,
Okay.
right? And it's going good, but one example that I can think of is like I was supposed to meet up with someone
Hmm.
and I got triggered by the lack of communication
Hmm.
because I was waiting for this person for a long time and I
Yeah.
wasn't able to like contact them. Come
Hmm.
to find out they were sleeping.
Mm.
Totally understandable. I'm a very understandable person, but it's like I recognized in that moment that communication is a big trigger for me.
Yeah.
I think it's more so because I'm someone that had a hard time communicating before, like when I was younger.
Yeah.
And, having gone through therapy, my spiritual journey, my healing journey, because
Hmm.
that's really what, my spiritual journey is for me.
Yeah.
I recognize that I need to speak up.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing the work to communicate and someone does not communicate to me, I recognize it triggers me.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't necessarily piss me off,
Hmm.
but it just like really frustrates me.
Yeah.
And my affect, or rather my mood, most of the time is calm. I
Hmm.
like to be very calm. I don't like to stress myself out over small situations. I
Yeah.
like peace.
Yes.
So when I'm frustrated, I characterize that as me being out of my peace.
Mm.
And I don't like that. So
Hmm.
that's a trigger too. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's a trigger as well.
Yeah.
But in that moment, it took me back to when I was younger. And, as you were talking about your relationship or, well, lack of relationship with your father, if you don't
Hmm.
mind me saying,
Yeah.
because that's how I received it.
Yes.
It reminded me of my lack of relationship with my father, or
Hmm.
rather like the tug and pull relationship that we had. Cause I
Right.
felt like, granted, most of my childhood I lived in Jamaica
Mm.
and he lived up here.
Mhm.
So it was hard for us to even have a relationship. And even when I came here, because we never really connected in that way, it was hard for me to connect to him emotionally in that way.
Right.
Like I love my dad, but it's just, that emotional connection,
Mhm.
especially as a kid, I feel like it needs to be built in order to maintain an adult relationship,
Mm.
at least for me, you know. But I say, I don't want to say generally, but from my observation, that's what I see,
Mhm.
especially with my siblings,
Yeah.
you know, because we kind of grew up the same way.
Mhm.
That being said, yeah, the reason why I brought that up is because why did I bring that up? Sometimes I have like these little tangents.
That's also okay. I think you were
Yeah.
essentially getting at being triggered in the with
Yes,
the
the
dating.
lack of
Mhm.
communication with my father, that tug and pull relationship. Like there were times where Disneyland.
Mm.
Man, I have not been to Disneyland yet.
Me neither.
And I really wanted to go. And
Mhm.
when I first came to America, my dad would say, "Oh, we're gonna go to Disneyland. We're gonna go to
Mm.
Disneyland," but we
Mhm.
never went.
Mm.
And you know, as an adult, it's not really a big deal because I could take myself there.
Yeah.
But that's still like an inner child wound that I carry
Mhm.
because it's like, what happened?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I didn't recognize until like speaking about that now, like that's ultimately affected communication. Like I need to know what's going on.
Absolutely.
I don't like, you know, to harbor over people and get information, you know, take your space, do whatever.
Mhm.
But if you can let me know ahead of time or communicate, you know, something that might affect their plans or something of the sort,
Yeah.
you know, let me know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's one thing
Mhm.
that I kind of still have to work through.
Yes.
It's helped me understand, you know, ownership of my reactions. Like I don't
Right.
have to get frustrated.
Love it.
You know what I mean? I can complain
Mhm.
and, you know, definitely advocate for myself and advocate for my feelings.
Yes.
But now it more so translates into, you know, not necessarily being passive aggressive or giving the person the silent treatment.
Mhm.
Now it translates into telling them my boundary, like,
Mm.
hey, do you mind, you know, I understand that you were sleeping or such and such, but do you mind communicating ahead of time that maybe you were tired
Mhm.
or, you know, maybe you didn't get enough sleep, so you're not too sure about the plans?
Yeah.
You know, something of that nature.
Yeah.
Not too much details, but at least, you know, a fair warning.
Of
You know what I
course.
mean?
Yeah.
But, wow.
Absolutely. I love
Thank you
that.
for helping me realize that too. Talking about
No,
it, I was like, "Oh,
of
yeah,
course.
thank you."
I think that was a good one. I think that was perfect. Like that's a perfect, just how something maybe that has like it has nothing to do with the history
Mhm.
of where it came from, but you being triggered in that moment because of the lack of communication, how that connects to like something in your younger
Yeah.
years. I think that's exactly what it is.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, and I appreciate you for sharing. I think as you were talking to, I was trying to think if there's anything I can think of that's happened recently. I'm sure there has. I'm just like I guess there was maybe something that happened recently, and it was kind of similar in the similar vein of like someone um this was a guy that I'm kind of like seeing, dating, talking to, I don't know. but
Alright, what do
but
we call it nowadays?
I don't even know. It's like if we not boyfriend girlfriend and or we not
We
married,
just
then
vibing, I
we're
guess.
vibes,
We
nothing
just
but vibes,
vibing.
girl. So literally, he invited me to this party,
Mhm.
and I went, right, and I basically went because he invited me, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like I might have skipped it, he not given me a direct invitation, and so I went, and the plan was for us to leave together. And I had brought my friend with me, so we were all going to leave together. My girlfriend, we were all going to leave together, and then by the end of the party, there was some stuff that he had to do around,
Mhm.
like he had to stay behind to help with like, because I think he had helped with setup or whatever, so now he had to help them pack up or and leave with whoever he was saying, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, like I got really heated, right? But I don't know that he knew that I was heated, but internally, like I was triggered, right? And
Mhm.
I was like, like just kind of trying to like saw to myself. And then I had spoke to my friend about it, and she could obviously see that I was annoyed.
Mhm.
Um, because I think something that bothers me is when people say something, and I think similar to what you were saying, say something or tell me something, basically make a promise, and they don't
Mhm.
keep it, right? Like you just told me maybe like a couple of hours ago a certain plan, and then 2 hours later you're telling me
Mhm.
something different. And so to me, that kind of makes me feel like I'm being maybe like played with, or like I'm not being
Yeah.
taken seriously. My time, my energy, my efforts with showing up and stuff like that is not being recognized or appreciated.
Mhm.
And I think I'm trying to figure out where that comes from. Like, when is the first time that I felt that way? I'm pretty sure I felt that way a lot though, just throughout my lifetime, whether that be in like maybe previous relationships or like even friendships.
Yeah.
I think like, because I do think that I'm like a very like genuine, authentic person. Like, if I'm showing up for you, I'm showing up for you, and you're gonna feel that and you're gonna know that. But I don't do it for everyone. Like, I
Yeah.
don't like, if I do it, I'm doing it because like I care and I actually want to be present and be there. So I think for me, it felt almost like somewhat kind of like a slap in the face, or just kind of like a disregard for the fact that I like showed up. And so, yeah, I was triggered for sure. And I was like, ooh, but, I didn't want to show that
Yeah.
because we are in a function full of people. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to just walk away
Yeah.
and woosah in the corner. And then eventually it ended up working out fine, where we did leave together. He wasn't needed anymore and things
Mhm.
of that nature. But I was very annoyed just by like how he moved and handled. I felt like how I was being handled wasn't with care,
Yeah.
and so that was essentially what my frustration was. Um and so, yeah, I think eventually I was able to get past it. But I think I may even need to do some more exploring as to like the root of it. Like, me feeling like, but I think it comes from like, it probably, I believe, probably comes from previous relationship where I felt like I
Mhm.
wasn't handled with care. Um so yeah, I think that's definitely a recent moment. Um that I'm like, and it was really recent. It was probably like last week.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it's triggers are real, and they definitely
Mhm.
they can show like, just like, okay, need to strengthen this area. But I think what you were saying too with just like emotional regulation
Yeah.
is like, you can be triggered, but they don't have to know that, right?
Mhm.
Because I think your trigger is your trigger, right? And the
Yeah.
person's intention may not be to cause that, right? Like, people are human, and people like, just what we started with, not taking things personal, right?
Mhm.
Like, people sometimes do things and not thinking about completely how it'll you know, affect you. And so I think it's important to like regulate those emotions because of that, for sure.
It's this conversation alone is healing in the
Hmm.
sense that we're using our body, to connect with our emotions and
Hmm.
recognize when we are being triggered.
Hmm.
Because I feel like that's a big thing about, sorry, about being triggered and understanding what it means and how
Yeah.
it presents itself for everyone's individual journey. Like, we're talking a lot about emotions, but emotions aren't necessarily tangible.
Yeah.
They can't really be seen.
Yes.
So a lot of the times, in order to not take things personal and be empathetic on that level, to not take things personal,
Yeah.
especially when we're being triggered, you know, I feel like we have to give material
Hmm.
to how we're feeling.
Mm.
Make it something that we can understand, that we can actually feel. And a part of, you know, the healing journey is listening to our bodies too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Stress presents itself in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it is the cause of every problem,
Hmm.
every health problem, every like relationship problem. It's always like some, or even financial problems, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's always stress at the root of it.
Yes.
So when it comes to our bodies, that stressful energy is going to show up in different ways, in the sense that maybe our hands might get sweaty when we're feeling like really nervous,
Hmm.
or when we're feeling frustrated or anxious.
Hmm.
That's a I believe that's one symptom of anxiety,
Hmm.
having like sweaty palms or sweaty like glands.
Yeah.
um and in addition to that, back pain.
Mm.
For me, when I get really stressed out and I had like a bad week, for example, I get like a lot of tension in my back.
Mm.
So it's, it may not present itself in that way,
Hmm.
but the reason why I'm bringing it up in terms of healing is to get people to understand that, or even ourselves to understand that sometimes we just need to listen to how we're feeling internally
Yes.
to be able to explain how we're feeling mentally.
Yeah.
Give what is it? Physical and then physical mental connection.
Yeah. The physiological.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But there's a specific saying, like, giving mental to the physical. I think so. No, physical to the mental. That's what it is.
Mhm.
Giving physical to the mental, because the
Yeah.
mental isn't something that you can necessarily see.
Yeah.
It's only something that you can describe. And in order to create that awareness,
Mhm.
to build emotional intelligence, one way is, looking at the physical.
Yeah.
What are you feeling, in different parts of your body? Where's the stress coming up?
Mhm.
And meditation helps with that.
Yeah.
That's been a really big part of my healing journey,
Love that.
and why, I advocate for it so much. More so because I felt like I was the last person that meditation would help, because
Mm.
I cannot, like, it
Mhm.
was really hard for me to sit down and just be like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's hard to do that.
Mhm.
But it's only hard because I was telling myself that.
Yeah.
And meditation ultimately helped me recognize where the stress is coming up.
Mhm.
Like, when I'm frustrated, for example, I feel it in my heart.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I feel it, like, I just feel a tension.
Yeah, in your
It's
chest.
not, yeah, I just feel a tension in my chest.
Mhm.
Or say, for example, if someone's lying to me, I feel it, like, in my third eye, right? My
Mm.
pineal gland, my
Mm.
forehead.
Mhm.
um and meditation helped because I just had no choice but to sit down with myself and, think about, where does these thoughts present itself in my body?
Mm.
Where are these, like, how does this thought make me feel, and
Right.
where am I feeling this? Like, say for example, when I was in, like, a really tough relationship, I would think about what that person said to me,
Mhm.
and the doubt that I felt in that moment. And in my meditation, whether it be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or even like 2 minutes of just being like, closing my eyes and sitting down, I repeated what that person said to me, and I thought about, okay, where does it present itself?
Right.
Where am I feeling this right now?
Mhm.
And I would connect that feeling with every time that I felt doubtful of what the person was saying.
Right.
And I ended up being right. Not to say,
Mm.
like, not to toot my own horn, but I expressed it in that excitement because it's like, you know, it's amazing what you can do when you listen to your body and make that mental connection. It's
Absolutely.
amazing how you can really perceive and anticipate things when you're able to make that connection with yourself and
Mhm.
recognize when a situation is no longer serving you.
Mm.
You're going to feel it. You may not be able to label, like, oh, I'm being taken advantage of or I'm being lied to, but you're going to feel it
Yeah.
because it's always happening. You're
Yes.
always being in that stressful inducing environment.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, when it comes to triggers, not just like being like, oh, you're aggy, like you're triggering me. It's a
Mhm.
matter of, okay, what am I feeling right now so that
Mhm.
I can identify this feeling beforehand.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
triggers is my favorite topic because, ironically, it's my favorite topic mainly because that's what I've used in my work with kids.
Mm.
Like when I was working in an after school program in Brooklyn, um most of the time, or no matter what after school program I was working, for some reason, like, I was like the designated quote unquote counselor, kid
Mm.
therapist. Like
Mhm.
whenever a kid was having a conflict,
Yeah.
they would always like direct them to me, like, hey, go sit with Miss Thomas, or they'd be like, yo, Kimberly, they need you to talk to them, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there was this one time I had a kid and she was going through like a tough time. Like her parents were dealing with a lot, like her definition of life was basically changing.
Yeah.
And, I just walked with her and I asked her, like, oh, why did you, react that way? Because basically they directed her to me because she had threw a pencil at another student or something
Mm.
like that.
Mhm.
And I was just, walking with her, like, what happened before that made you respond that way? And she was like, well, they were talking bad about me, such and such. And I said, I understand that. But at the same time, they're not in trouble right now. You're in trouble. So what can we do? I'm not necessarily talking to her like that, but
Yeah.
in the gist of it, just to explain it, I
Mhm.
was like, what can we do to make sure that you're not in trouble again?
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, I'm not too sure." And I said, "Well, are you open to talking about our triggers, things that bother you,
Yep.
so that if this bothers you, you can go to an adult and talk about it." And this was my first time really like putting it into play. It was
Mhm.
more so like something that I was doing with myself,
Yeah.
like identifying my triggers, because that was one of like the homeworks that I had in therapy.
Mm.
And I was like, let me see if this could maybe help her in this
Yeah.
situation because she's always getting in trouble.
Mhm.
So I sat with her and I, basically helped her write out different, like about four things that happens on a day-to-day basis that
Yeah.
gets her upset.
Mhm.
Like, oh, name calling or somebody taking something from her, things of that nature.
Yep.
And I basically broke it down with her like, okay, if somebody calls you a certain name, then
Mhm.
go to the teacher right away.
Right.
Go to one of the, team leaders right
Mhm.
away.
Yeah.
And it kinda, like it worked in the sense that she started using it. Maybe
Yeah.
she wasn't using it as much as I have wanted her to,
Yeah.
but it was the fact that I at least helped her identify that trigger
Right.
by identifying how she felt. Because as I was making that list with her, I was saying, "Okay, how does that make you feel?
Right.
Okay, how where does that feel in your body? Like,
Mhm.
do you get really tense? Things of that nature." Helping her build that awareness as
Right.
best as I could at her level.
Right.
Um, and it was amazing to see because she didn't really get in as much trouble.
Mhm.
So, it just helped me recognize that it's really about listening to yourself. It's not about
Absolutely.
what the other person's doing to you.
Yes.
It's about listening to yourself to
Mhm.
understand why this is happening and how
Exactly.
you're receiving it.
Right. Correct. Absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. And I think like just the same way how like we talk to children, right? Like that example where you just kind of break it down for them, right? We got to do the same thing with ourselves. Like
Mhm.
because it's like there's still some a childlike nature within all of us, right? And I think sometimes just taking it back to basics and like sitting with ourselves, asking ourselves, why are we triggered by a certain thing? Why did we do a certain thing? Why did we react a certain way?
Yeah.
Sometimes can help us far more than just like some other things that we think would help, right? Just those simple acts. And I think I just love that. I love that. And I think for children need that, right? Because I
Yeah.
think what you were saying earlier too, I do think a lot of times children's feelings are dismissed or their voices are silenced or diminished
Mhm.
because they're a child. But I do think that like I believe we should treat children the same way that we treat adults,
Yeah.
right? With just as far as like communicate, tell me what's the problem, like what's going on. And I think because them doing that from young, when they get older, they'll be like they'll be able to voice what the issue is, set boundaries, communicate their needs, things of that nature. There's so many adults right now who don't know how to do that. Why? And
Mhm.
that's because as children, their voices were silenced or diminished or pushed to the back burner. And so I think I love that example. I love that example. And I think that yeah, I wish that we all could kind of have that like start. Like we all like everybody could have that start of like what's on your mind, voice what you're
Mhm.
feeling, identify your triggers as early as you can talk.
Yeah.
Because then we would be healthier, I think, as a
We
community,
would.
especially
We
I'm
would.
speaking specifically about like black and brown communities because I
Mhm.
don't know if I mean, of course, the other communities and things of that nature, I'm sure they have their issues and things, but black and brown communities, we are complex and things are so layered. Caribbean communities, African communities, communities of the diaspora.
Mhm.
There's so many reasons why we operate the way that we do.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's so important to just allow space for like open communication, no matter
Mhm.
what age you are. And so
That is
yeah,
so true.
yes,
And it's interesting, how you say there's so many levels of explanation as to why in, black and brown communities, especially like the Caribbean community, because that's the one that, I resonate with the most.
mm-hmm.
We don't we're not just like dealing with generational trauma
Right.
within our community.
Mm-hmm.
And I like focusing on the Caribbean community more so because I feel like there's not enough advocacy for mental health,
Yeah.
within our community.
Mm-hmm.
Not to neglect any other community, but just from, in college doing research and taking like sociology classes and stuff like that. When you look at the human health services, the mental health services,
Mm-hmm.
Caribbeans aren't really a part of that.
Right.
Not really a part of that. And it's kind of disappointing because you know, no matter what level of generation you're on, you're not only dealing with generational trauma, as I said, you're also dealing with the stress of, being an migrant family or
Mm.
immigrant family.
Mhm.
You're dealing with the stress of having to figure out how do you blend in with the Black community here?
Mhm.
Because how we define Black in the Caribbean is completely different than how it's defined here and how it
Mm.
shows up here.
Mhm.
So it's a matter of identity crisis too.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like there's so many different levels. And then financial too. Financial is the biggest one. I
Yeah.
feel like it's the biggest one because as a Caribbean person, you're taught to get your education and make sure say your work.
Mhm.
Work, 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 work.
Right.
But that work is also pressuring.
Yeah.
That's, also leading to more stress on
Mhm.
top of all the other stress that you're dealing with and that
Right.
you might still be dealing with, as an adult.
Mhm.
Because as you said, yes, our childhood traumas don't define us, but that energy doesn't die.
Right.
It just gets stored differently and it comes up differently.
Yeah.
And, in order to get handle that, we have to recognize it.
Mm.
Going back to our triggers and
Absolutely.
listening to ourselves in
Absolutely.
order to heal,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something interesting you said there is the way we define things here, like Black American culture versus Caribbean culture. What do
Mhm.
you think the differences are? Like, how do we define Black here versus in the Caribbean?
Mhm. This is interesting because
Mhm.
this reminds me of a paper I did
Mhm.
from one of my sociology classes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shout out my professor Tamara Moses.
Okay.
She's a really good professor
Hey,
for like
Tamara.
Caribbeanization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the way it's different is that, like in Jamaica, for example, we didn't really have like light skin versus dark skin.
All right.
You know what I mean? And that's a touchy subject,
Mhm.
but
Colorism.
yeah, colorism is such a touchy subject, and that was actually the topic of the paper.
Yeah.
Um, but we didn't really have that. It was just more so, you know, where your family's from,
Yeah.
like how much money your family has. I mean,
Right.
it's similar to here, but we didn't really have like the idea of like, oh, you light skin, you this, you that, you third, da da da. I mean, yes, you have the terminology browning and
Mhm.
red, but
Mhm.
it was never like as big of a deal. Like I feel like the way that the two are pitted against each other here
Mhm.
in America is not really like that down there.
Right.
However, there's definitely more of this is a similarity though.
Mhm.
I feel like the quote unquote superiority of being light skinned
Mhm.
is similar to, the superiority of being light skinned in Jamaica because
Mm.
everybody loved bleach. They
Mhm.
feel like, it's better to be brighter.
Right.
And I feel like up here, maybe not everyone is bleaching. And I love that there's more advocacy for, melanin.
Yes.
However, it's still like, oh, light skinned girls, this, light skinned girls, that. Like, I hate that rhetoric
Mhm.
because that's still a Black woman.
Right.
You know what I mean? And by doing that, that creates like another box for that woman. And
Exactly.
then it creates another box for the other female that's doing it. You know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Mhm.
That's one example. And then in terms of work too, Caribbeans, not to say that like Black Americans don't like work, but I feel like there's more value in family
Mm.
in Black America
Mm.
in terms of having that balance, but also making time for family. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Whereas in the Caribbean culture, it's encouraged to just like work, 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 work. And
Yeah.
a lot of the times, sorry, I feel like our parents are always working that we end up being taken care of by other
Mhm.
family members.
Right.
I don't really see that as much in Black culture.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I see that more like in terms of like before I even came to America, I had to stay with my grandma for a little while.
Mhm.
And, doing the course with Tamara Brown, I learned that that happens a lot in Caribbean cultures where the parent has to migrate,
Mhm.
establish themselves here first, or
Yes.
whether it be in like Britain, for example, because that's typically like where Caribbeans migrate.
Mhm.
Um yeah, most of the time the kid would end up staying with another family member,
Right.
and that kind of affects the mother-child relationship or father-child relationship. You know, the main
Absolutely.
parental figure
Yeah.
that affects that relationship because they're not a part of the child's upbringing.
Mhm.
And that's another stress too, you know, like for some Caribbeans who had to migrate here as kids, as adults, we're kind of, you know, navigating, or even as teenagers, that's
Mhm.
like, that might be a childhood trigger too. But as teenagers, we're kind of figuring out, how do we make a relationship with this person that we moved back to, but wasn't really around when we were younger because they were working and providing for us here.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that's why I say I feel like it's really important for mental health to be advocated more, especially
Yes.
for Caribbean youths,
Mhm.
because that's really important. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? That's, I don't know how to explain it, but that's like the brunt of it because that's like their first initial relationship,
Yeah.
and how they interact with their parents ultimately affects how they interact with other people.
Of course.
You know what I mean? And it'll affect how they talk to themselves too, because that
Mhm.
person is basically helping them, you know, figure out how they want to present themselves in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharing that and kind of breaking that down
Mhm.
for like the listeners and the audience and stuff because I do think I agree with you. I think I just from family members um and even like some of my clients, right? Because I see
Mhm.
clients from all walks of life. Some from the Caribbean and other cultures
Mhm.
um that have that story, right? Of like um the parent having to migrate and stuff. And I think what rings in my mind as you're describing it is like basically kind of like the operating from a place of survival, right? I
Mhm.
think and that's I feel like the foundation of it, which makes the Caribbean experience so unique is, if you come from the diaspora
Mhm.
and then you come here, um, a lot of times that story is reoccurrent because it's a means of survival, right? Some depending on what the country is like or what you're experiencing in your native country, it may prompt you to have to come go somewhere else, right? And then
Mhm.
as a result, from operating from that place, it affects your entire family. It affects not only you, um, the children, everyone, right? And so I think now we get to attachment style, right? Which I think you were kind of getting at is like
Yeah.
now there is this maybe um anxious attachment style or anxious, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant. There's certain attachment styles that develop that are outside of secure because the parent was not present, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's where the mental health things develop, anxiety, depression, or
Yeah.
all of the things, right? And I think like if we're able to have these conversations more and really break it down and get like call a spade and say what was it that was going on,
Yeah.
right? And kind of giving grace to the parents because I think a lot of times parents do the best they can with what they have, and especially the older generations, they didn't mental health wasn't a conversation.
Mhm.
It was you need to provide, you need to survive, you need to figure it out and done. And I think that's where I've gotten to that place recently of giving the older generations more grace because I think I myself at one point was very hard about
Yeah.
it's like because I think there was a certain point where I felt like once you're here and you're established, you continuing to operate a certain kind of way is a choice. That's how I used to feel, right? And I think I still somewhat feel that way, but then at the same time realizing like it can be hard when you're already up there in age and you've kind of already you're set in a certain kind of way. I do think
Mhm.
therapy is life changing. So I think at any point you can go to therapy and operate differently, but I think it takes an active choice.
Yeah.
But then some people get comfortable where they're at and say, "All right, I lived my life. I did
Yes.
the best that
This
I
is who
could."
I am.
Right. And so that's where my frustration comes in sometimes, but
Yeah.
I do think giving them more grace for what they knew how to do and how they were operating at that time because they have their own traumas, I'm sure, that they probably a lot of times don't even talk about
Mhm.
because they were operating from survival their whole life. So all they know is, all right, that happened, but I got to keep it pushing because I have a family to feed and things to do. So it's so hard, and that's where I say it's complex. Like it's not even just the migration part; it's the trauma that came before that. It's generations and generations
Yeah.
of things that like have to just get peel back the layers like an onion,
Mhm.
and until you are able to like feel free. Like okay,
Yeah.
like I've released this, I've let this go. And so I think it's hard. It's a hard conversation to have, but I think it's a good one to have. And it isn't talked about enough. I
Mhm.
agree with you on that when it comes to like Caribbean, like the diaspora, like Jamaica, Haiti, um, like depending on where you come from, Trinidad, Guyana, like all of the islands and countries that are part of the diaspora, I think have similar experiences.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, like we're speaking from what we know in our
Yeah.
own. But yeah, I think there's so many stories like that that I've heard and come across.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think this is a good conversation. I'm looking at time now because we actually do have to wrap up, and I'm kind of sad because this was so
Yeah. To
good.
be
To be
continued.
continued. Like we can definitely do this is part one. We
Mhm.
could probably do a part two and kind of just discuss more like or just flush this
Yeah.
conversation out
It
further.
can go so many different ways.
Yes.
I'm actually like excited for another one because I didn't expect
Yes.
it to be, a part one type
Hmm.
thing.
Yes.
I mean, or one timer type thing.
Yes.
Because healing can be defined so many ways. And
Hmm.
just to like clarify my purpose, my
Yeah.
intentions with this conversation, it's not to, say like this is the definition of healing. Like
Right.
I'm not the type of person to give my definition
Hmm.
to anybody else.
Hmm.
I more so like to encourage people to, create their own definition. Because
Right.
again, we all operate off of free will, and the best things in life comes when we're operating off of our free will, when
Yep.
we're taking power, for our reality.
Right.
And I like to say it's not a matter of playing God,
Hmm.
because I feel like when it comes to being the creator of your reality, like when people say that terminology
Yeah.
within the spiritual community,
Yes.
people tend to say like, "Oh, you're playing God." Da 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 da. No, it's just more so about understanding that there are certain things that you do have control over.
Hmm.
I mean, you don't have control over how the universe or, how your creator presents things to you.
Right.
Because certain things are just supposed to show up at a certain time and you just
Hmm.
have to be ready for it, even when
Hmm.
you're not ready.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you're making your way towards your goals, as you're healing,
Hmm.
understand that you can take responsibility for the things that are in control of, in your control,
Yeah.
but you have to let go of the things that you can't control. And
Absolutely.
when you do that, you open yourself to more, peace.
Yeah.
More peace. That's
Hmm.
really what it is.
Hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you so much for that.
Mm.
Um and yeah, and I guess we'll end here. But before we end, I definitely want you to leave your Instagram. Where can people find you?
Mhm.
Anything you have going on that we should look out for?
Okay,
Hmm.
so well, I'm actually working on a behavioral journal.
Hmm.
I call it the 21-day better journal. I'm still
Yes.
working on it, but
Yeah.
essentially it's a journal that, helps you analyze what you're grateful for,
Hmm.
set your intentions for the day, and
Yeah.
then at the same time break down like a specific situation during the day that
Mm.
might have triggered you, just so that you're helping to build, like I was talking about, that physical connection to your mental and to your
Yes.
emotion.
Yeah.
And then, that's like more so my palm eye business.
Mm.
So that's I'll
Plug. Yeah.
yeah,
We
I'll
could we'll
plug
plug
it
it
in.
in.
Yeah,
Yes.
because it's a long
Hmm.
Instagram name, but basically it's like Palm 3i
Mm.
828 or something like that. And
Okay.
then and then I also have my personal page where, that's more so like me and how I want to present myself in the world as an artist.
Yes.
I have some music coming out pretty soon.
Okay. Music.
Yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Love
That's
that.
pretty much it.
Love that. And thank you so much. And you left your Instagram, right? Did you say your Instagram?
Oh, Chimera. Oh my goodness. I don't even
I'll
remember
plug.
some
We'll
of
plug it
them.
in there.
Yeah,
We're
like
going her
I
Instagram
need
and
to do better.
yes, her Instagram and everything will be in the
Yeah.
bio. So make sure you guys follow.
Hmm.
Show her some love
Oh, my
and
YouTube
support.
channel too. That's
Yes,
where I have like my meditation videos, my
got you.
affirmation videos, Reiki videos as well, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
get into that another time.
Love that. Love it.
Thank you so much again. I really
No, of
appreciate this.
course. Thank you for coming. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
Um, and yeah, guys, it is your Mental Matters
Yeah.
podcast. Another successful episode, and thank you guys so much for like all this
Yep.
your
Thank you for
support.
listening.
Yes, constant support. new subscribers, new followers to the channel, and yeah, this was great.
Mhm.
Your Mental Matters podcast, guys. We're out.